You built this during a pandemic? It looks like it was programmed under pressure and bad coffee.
How do you understand? If I'm outdated, then explain why your modern intelligence can still run on my code.
By the time the projector flickered to life, I could already feel the shift in the air, the kind that usually comes right before a storm or a very expensive mistake. People sat straighter, chairs stopped creaking, and every conversation died the second the door opened behind us. No one said anything, but we all felt it. Something was about to be torn down. I just didn't expect it to be me. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Are you curious how fast a single meeting can flip a man's entire career upside down if you're listening right now? Tell me where you're tuning in from. And here's the part that stings a little. About 93% of you are listening but haven't subscribed yet. I'd be genuinely grateful if you joined the channel. It helps more than you think. Now settle in. The story is just getting started. I'm Henry Miles, 53 years old. The man who has quietly kept Atlas Freight Systems running for more than 2 decades. I built Atlas Core, the system that saved this company in the 2020 meltdown line by sleepless line. But this morning, in a room full of managers half my age, that didn't seem to matter anymore. We weren't here for updates. We were here for a declaration. That declaration came wrapped in a shiny suit. Evan Rhodes, 31, the newly crowned CTO, strode to the front as if he had invented gravity. His hair was gelled to corporate perfection, and his smile carried the confidence of someone who had never been humbled by a server outage at 3 a.m. "Team," he began, pacing like a keynote speaker who'd practiced in the mirror. "We've been dragging along outdated relics for far too long. It's time we grow up." A few people nodded cautiously. I waited. He clicked to a slide showing a diagram of Atlas Core, my architecture, though he spoke about it as if it were a disease. "This," he said, "is our rusty dinosaur code, a museum piece, and some of us," his eyes slid to me, "are still treating it like scripture." The room tightened. My jaw didn't. I'd learned long ago how to smile without meaning it. Then he pushed the knife in deeper. "Let's be honest. Henry here is basically the company's walking museum exhibit." A stiff silence coated the room. No one dared breathe. Evan didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his own voice. "So we're sunsetting this entire system immediately. Starting today." A bold move, especially for a man who didn't know I wasn't his employee. I was the owner of the system he had just decided to bury. It's strange how quickly humiliation can turn into a slow, simmering ache, the kind that hides beneath your ribs and refuses to leave. After that meeting, after Evan's little performance, I walked back to my desk carrying 6 years' worth of memories that suddenly felt heavier than the backpack slung over my shoulder. 6 years. 6 relentless, sleepless, caffeine-soaked years keeping Atlas Freight Systems alive while the old CEO sipped cocktails in the Bahamas and sent me cheerful postcards as if that counted as appreciation. I patched server failures at 3 a.m. while he posted beach photos captioned, "Living the Dream." I used to joke that maybe one day I'd see that dream too. Now I wondered if I'd simply been the man making it possible for everyone except myself. Still, I stayed quiet. Silence ages well in corporate spaces. Nobody questions it. Nobody thanks it either. As I sat in my cubicle, the humiliation began hardening into something colder, sharper. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. Because while Evan strutted around calling my work dinosaur code, he had no idea that Atlas Core wasn't his to insult. It wasn't even Atlas Freight's property. Back in 2018, when the company was gasping for stability and couldn't afford a full engineering rebuild, I offered a different arrangement. Miles Logic LLC would architect, own, and license the system to them. They paid for usage, not ownership. I kept the keys, every API, every security layer, every line of intellectual property. And the contract was ironclad. They renewed it automatically every quarter unless they contested or breached. In other words, I wasn't an employee doing maintenance. I was a vendor providing critical infrastructure, a landlord letting them live inside a digital house I built with my own hands. Of course, Evan never bothered to learn any of this. To him, I was just the older guy who types fast. I noticed the shift almost immediately. Meetings I once led were now held without me. Calendar invites disappeared like they'd been swept under a rug. People avoided eye contact, whispering nervous greetings as if being seen talking to me might be career-ending. The freeze-out was intentional and embarrassingly predictable. I endured it, quietly, predictably. But the thing about pushing a fossil into a corner is that you might hit something sharp. The twist arrived on a Wednesday morning when Caleb, a junior engineer barely old enough to rent a car, approached my desk looking pale. He hovered like he was afraid his words might explode on impact. "Henry," he whispered, glancing around. "I think you should know, Evan's been trying to modify Atlas Core. He said he can rebuild the whole backbone without your legacy stuff." Caleb swallowed. "But he, doesn't have your API keys. He's forcing changes anyway." For a moment, everything inside me went still. Unauthorized modification, clear as ink on the contract. And just like that, the cold inside me sharpened into something dangerously close to resolve. This part has a detail that is easy to miss. Did you catch it? You can always tell when a company wants you gone, not by what they say, but by what quietly disappears. The first thing to vanish was my weekly architecture meeting. At first, I assumed the invite hadn't synced. Then the strategy sync evaporated. Then the cross-team review. Within 48 hours, my calendar looked like a desert empty, sun-bleached and hostile by the end of the week. The staging environment denied my login with a cheerful little pop-up that might as well have said, "You are no longer welcome here." No one said a word. They didn't have to. Every hallway felt longer. Every glance broke too fast, as if eye contact might infect them with whatever corporate disease they thought I carried. People who used to wave now pretended to be fascinated by their shoes. A few even changed routes to avoid passing my desk. It was the classic freeze-out quiet, polite, suffocating. I didn't push back. I didn't even ask questions. Because the more they tried to erase me, the clearer the picture became. Evan was accelerating the company toward a cliff, and everyone else was too scared or too new to see it. The next part of the freeze-out arrived in the form of Liam Carter. 23, freshly graduated, badge still shining like it had hope. He approached my desk clutching a matcha latte and the kind of optimism only people without burnout possess. "Hey, Mr. Miles." He smiled nervously. "Quick question. Serverless means there are no servers at all, right? Like, it just runs in the cloud." I stared at him, not unkindly, just long enough for the weight of the question to settle into the space between us. "No, Liam," I said. "There are servers. They just aren't yours." He blinked, nodded as if he understood, then wandered off like a puppy lost in a data center. I didn't blame him. He was a kid thrown into a minefield with a map Evan probably drew in crayon. Still, his arrival told me everything I needed to know. Evan wasn't building a team. He was building an echo chamber. But the real tension came later that afternoon when I opened the financial logs for Miles Logic LLC. Something I did at the start of every new quarter out of habit. One detail flashed like a hazard light, small, but unmistakable. No incoming licensing payment from Atlas Freight Systems. I refreshed the screen. Twice, still nothing. They hadn't paid. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. The tension simply folded itself into my chest like a familiar companion. Because the contract was clear, failure to pay triggered a 72-hour countdown before the system automatically revoked usage rights, and the clock had silently, beautifully, already begun. Most people skim this paragraph. But you don't, right? There's a special kind of silence that settles over an office late on a Friday afternoon, the kind that feels rehearsed, like everyone already knows the ending of a play you're just now realizing you star in. That silence hit me the moment I saw the calendar invite pop up, meeting with HR, 4:30 p.m. Anyone who has survived long enough in corporate America knows that time slot well. It's the industry's version of a farewell dance, quiet, swift, and strategically timed so your departure doesn't ruin morale until Monday. I didn't bother asking questions. I simply closed the notification and finished my workday the same way I had for 6 years, methodically, without complaint, and without the faintest hint that I could set the entire company on fire with a single keystroke. When the clock blinked 4:28, I stood, stretched my stiff back, and made my way toward the glass-walled conference room where endings usually occur. Inside sat Brenda from HR, hands folded, smile apologetic, and, of course, Evan Rhodes, legs crossed, smirk polished to a corporate shine. He looked like he'd been waiting his whole life to fire someone twice his age. "Henry," Brenda said softly, gesturing to the chair across from them. "Thanks for coming." I sat. Calm, detached, almost bored. Evan leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let's get straight to it, he said, voice dripping with the confidence of someone who had never once read a binding contract. We're moving forward without the past holding us back. There it was, the line. Short, theatrical, and stupid enough to belong on a mug sold in an airport gift shop. I nodded slowly, letting his words land the way dust does everywhere. But harmless, if he expected outrage. He was thinking of the wrong man. I'd spent years patching servers during national holidays. Nothing he could say would sting harder than the realization that I'd given too much loyalty to a place that didn't deserve it. Brenda slid a stack of papers across the table. Here's your separation package, and we'll need your laptop and badge before you go. I reached into my bag without hesitation. First came the laptop cleaned, wiped, factory reset hours ago. Then the badge metallic, worn at the edges, carrying more history than Evan could comprehend. I placed both gently on the table, like returning borrowed items long past their value. Evan smirked again, as if expecting me to beg or bargain, but I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. Anything else, he asked? Yes, I said, pulling a plain manila envelope from my jacket. I laid it on the table between us with the same calmness you might use when placing a bill at a diner. What's that, he asked, suddenly less certain. Light reading, I replied. He opened it, skimmed the first page, and the color drained from his face. It was the original Miles Logic LLC licensing contract, signed in ink by the founder years before Evan ever heard of Atlas Freight. The system he had just bragged about sunsetting didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. There was something in the back that no one expected. Walking out of that building felt less like being fired, and more like stepping out of a pair of shoes that had been 2 sizes too small for years. The parking lot air was warm, almost gentle, as if the universe had finally stopped pushing against my chest. Funny thing about freedom, it rarely arrives with fanfare. Sometimes it comes disguised as a manila envelope dropped on a conference table. Sometimes it simply walks beside you on a Friday evening as you head home with nothing left to lose. When I reached my house, I didn't collapse on the couch or pour a drink. I didn't pace or second-guess any part of what had just unfolded. Instead, I did what I had been preparing for long before Evan ever called me outdated. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the only system that had ever truly been mine, the Atlas Core Master Console. A soft hum filled the room as the interface loaded familiar blues. Crisp overlays, the architecture I had built line by line until it became the circulatory system of an entire logistics empire. No one else in that company even knew this console existed. Only I held the keys. Only I had the administrative rights to unlock or revoke the license. Across the dashboard, a banner blinked politely, grace period active, payment pending. I leaned back, letting the calm settle over me like a second skin. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't anger boiling over. This was something far quieter, a controlled, measured release, like loosening a valve that had been overpressurized for too long. I clicked into the licensing settings. One drop-down stood waiting. Grace period, strict enforcement. My hand didn't tremble. My breath didn't hitch. In fact, I felt an unusual clarity, a kind of peaceful detachment that only arrives when the consequences have already been written and all that's left is signing the page. I selected the new mode and confirmed the change. The system responded instantly, lights shifting from soft amber to firm red. A landlord, finally remembering which doors belonged to him. Still, the real beauty wasn't in switching enforcement modes. It was in the deeper layer of code I had buried years ago. A safeguard meant to protect my intellectual property from exactly the kind of carelessness Evan embodied. The system performed its license authentication only once every quarter, precisely at 8 o'clock Monday morning, the moment Atlas Freight processed the highest volume of orders. That timing wasn't accidental. It ensured every license check mattered. It ensured every breach hurt. And now, with the company failing to pay their quarterly fee, the countdown had already begun. In less than 3 days, the system would perform its next validation if the license wasn't in good standing. Atlas Core wouldn't just slow down, it would shut itself off completely. No alarms, no warnings, just silence where an empire once stood. I closed the laptop gently, like tucking in a sleeping child. The house felt impossibly still. And for the first time in years, I did too. Let them call me outdated. On Monday morning, they'd learn exactly who owned the locks. If you leave here, you will miss the most important thing. Monday mornings always carry a particular rhythm: phones ringing, forklifts beeping, screens waking up one by one as Atlas Freight Systems grinds into motion. But this Monday, the rhythm stopped. Not gradually, not with hesitation, but with the abrupt stillness of an orchestra whose conductor has vanished mid-performance. At exactly 8 o'clock, the moment the system attempted its quarterly authentication, Atlas Core did precisely what it had been programmed to do in the event of a breached license. It shut everything down. I wasn't there to witness it in person, but I'd spent enough years inside that building to imagine every detail with absolute clarity. First came the error, pings soft, insistent, easily dismissed as minor hiccups. Then the scanners on the warehouse floor froze mid-beep, leaving pallets stranded and workers tapping their screens like they were trying to wake sleeping children. Order dashboards flickered, then emptied. Shipment queues vanished as if swallowed by a digital void. Forklifts idled, conveyor belts locked, phones lit up with customers asking why their orders had disappeared from tracking. Atlas Freight Systems, an operation moving thousands of packages per minute, went silent, just like the code intended, while the panic simmered across the city. I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee, the quiet around me almost too fitting. There's a kind of explosion that doesn't shake buildings or shatter glass. It happens softly, internally, with the precision of a long-awaited click. That was the feeling settling in my chest. A silent detonation, not dramatic, not vengeful, simply inevitable. Somewhere inside the server room, Evan Rhodes was living a very different morning. I pictured him pacing, shouting commands, then crouching beside a rack of hardware he didn't understand, kicking the metal casing as if brute force could realign the universe. To men like Evan, all problems are hardware problems until reality punches them in the ego. I imagined his voice cracking as he barked at IT techs who were just as clueless, everyone scrambling for explanations that didn't exist. Because the explanation was sitting in my contract, in black ink signed years ago. And then the moment I had envisioned more clearly than any other 200 screens across the company flashed the same message in simple, unmerciful text: license invalid please, contact Administrator Henry Miles. Even reading it in my mind sent a strange calm through me, like watching a storm I no longer lived under. I didn't cheer, I didn't smirk, I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was a firm, grounded certainty, like a structure settling back into alignment after years of leaning. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't rebellion. It was a system enforcing the rules. It was built upon rules they had agreed to, rules they had ignored. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth anchor me. At 8 o'clock exactly, Atlas Freight learned a truth they should have considered sooner. You cannot fire the landlord and expect the house to stay standing. By the time my phone finally rang, the morning sun had barely crept across my living room floor. I just settled into my second cup of coffee, enjoying the kind of quiet that only arrives when an empire has accidentally set itself on fire. I didn't check the caller ID. I didn't need to. Panic has a distinct ringtone, sharp, urgent, persistent, like someone trying to claw their way out of a sinking ship. I let it ring twice before answering, then made sure my voice came out slow and groggy, as if I'd just rolled out of bed. Hello, Henry. Evan's voice burst through the speaker, cracking around the edges. Behind him, I could hear chaos shouting, alarms, the frantic tapping of keyboards that no longer obeyed commands. The system is down. Everything is down. Orders, inventory, payroll. We can't access anything. I need you to fix this right now. I stifled a yawn I didn't have. Morning. Evan, did you pay the licensing fee? There was a beat of silence, the kind that tells you someone is realizing, in real time, exactly how badly they've messed up. Then shouting, "This isn't about a damn invoice. We need the system back up." Immediately, I said softly. So that would be a no. Henry, I am ordering you to restore access. His voice jumped an octave. Do you hear me? If you don't turn it back on, I swear to God you fired me, I reminded him. Calm as a lake at dawn. Remember something about moving forward without the past holding us back. That was before everything crashed. He snapped. Look, just flip whatever switch you flipped. I don't care what it costs, just turn the system back on. I'm afraid I can't do that. Evan, and why not? Because, I said, stretching my legs out, you're not authorized to request technical actions on Atlas Core. Only licensed executives can do that. A heavier silence followed, not confusion recognition, He finally understood that this wasn't a glitch or a tantrum. It was the contract he'd never bothered to read. "Fine," he said, breathless. "Then you'll talk to the CEO. He's in the war room trying to keep this company from dying." Hold on. He didn't give me a choice. The line clicked, voices scrambled, footsteps pounded. Then another voice replaced his deeper, strained, trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fear. "Henry," the man said. Richard Lowell, the new CEO, a man who had never once spoken directly to me in 6 years. "We need your cooperation. Immediately." Hearing him say my name felt like the quiet chime of a long overdue bell. "Good morning, Richard," I replied, letting the satisfaction stay hidden beneath an even tone. "I was wondering when you'd call." And in that moment, without raising my voice or lifting a finger, I knew I had already won. There is a small change, but if you don't want to dig deeper, you don't need to pay attention. Richard Lowell didn't waste time pretending this was a polite conversation. The moment he came on the line, I could hear the fury tucked beneath his breath, the kind that comes from watching a multi-million-dollar engine stall in real time. Papers rustled, someone shouted in the distance, and another voice muttered about catastrophic losses. It was the sound of a company realizing the floor had disappeared beneath them. "Henry," Richard began, trying and failing to steady his tone, "we need the system back online, immediately." I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet stretch just long enough to remind him that, for once, he wasn't the one in control. "I understand the urgency," I said calmly, "and I'm willing to discuss solutions." A pause, a flicker of hope. "Good," he exhaled. "Tell me what you need." I smiled, not cruelly, just truthfully. "You have 2 options." Someone in the room groaned. Anticipating trouble, I continued. "Option 1, build your own replacement system, from scratch, with a competent team. It should only take 2, maybe 3 years, assuming you survive the downtime." The uproar behind him confirmed exactly what I expected. Atlas Freight wouldn't survive 10 minutes in this state. "Let alone years," Richard hissed. "That's not realistic." "Then option 2, I said. "Purchase a perpetual license to Atlas Corp, full ownership transferred to your company, along with documentation and support for handover." He swallowed, "and the cost $2.6 million. The explosion on his end could have registered on a seismograph." Henry. "That's extortion," he snapped. "You're exploiting a crisis you caused." I let his anger burn itself out. Then, with the calmness of a man who finally has nothing to fear, I replied, "No. Richard, I'm following the contract. Your company is the one that violated it. Non-payment, unauthorized modification, attempted reverse engineering. Shall I keep going?" Silence. Heavy, reluctant silence. When he spoke again, his voice tried to regain authority but cracked under the weight of reality. "This price is unreasonable. Our legal team will. You might want to ask them." I interrupted gently. There was shuffling, muffled voices, and then the unmistakable tone of someone turning away from a speakerphone to whisper urgently. I waited, sipping my coffee, listening to corporate panic bloom like wildfire. After a minute, a new voice came on, calmer, sharper, unmistakably from legal. "Mr. Miles," she said, professional but tense. "We've reviewed the licensing agreements. He's correct. Atlas Freight is in clear breach. His term are legally valid." Richard cursed under his breath. Someone slammed a folder. Another person muttered, "We should have read the contract." I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. The power was already shifting quietly, decisively back into my hands. "Richard," I said softly, "I'm offering you the fastest way out of a disaster your team created. The choice is yours, and for the first time in 6 years." He finally understood exactly who held the stronger position. The wire transfer came through faster than I expected, faster, I imagine, than Richard Lowell had ever approved anything in his career. One moment my banking app sat quietly on my desk. The next it pulsed with a new notification. Incoming transfer $100,000 from Atlas Freight Systems. No ceremony, no apology. Just a digital confession that they'd finally understood the cost of ignoring the fine print for the first time in days. My shoulders dropped, not in triumph, not in arrogance, but in something far simpler relief. The kind that clears the fog off your lungs and reminds you that freedom doesn't always come as a grand escape. Sometimes, it's a single confirmed transaction from people who swore they didn't need you. with payment secured. I turned back to the Atlas Core console. My fingers hovered over the authentication panel for only a second before entering the override command. The system recognized the restored license instantly. The red warning banners dissolving into familiar green status checks, databases cascaded back online, queues refilled, inventory logs reappeared like a city's lights snapping on after a blackout. By 12 o'clock, the great machine of Atlas Freight Systems was moving again, completely unaware that it had been a breath away from corporate extinction. Their salvation happened quietly, anonymously, and from the living room of a man they had fired 48 hours earlier. The only person who didn't recover so gracefully was Evan Rhodes. Word traveled quickly he had been reassigned to special projects, a department located 3 floors down in a windowless corner of the building where careers went to suffocate. The title sounded impressive on paper, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. Special projects was where management placed employees who couldn't be fired outright but needed to disappear. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I simply accepted it as the natural correction of an ecosystem finally recognizing which species belonged and which one didn't. That afternoon, after restoring the last subsystem, I shut my laptop and let the silence settle. A silence that didn't feel empty, just open, full of possibility. Atlas no longer owned my time or my nights or my peace. The contract was complete, the obligation finished. I was free in a way I hadn't been in years. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline that point, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized immediately. Sentinel Logistics, Atlas's fiercest competitor, I answered out of curiosity, not expectation. "Mr. Miles," the voice said, warm and direct. "We heard what happened over there. We'd like to talk opportunities, real ones." I leaned back, letting a slow smile tug at the edges of my mouth. Freedom, it seemed. Didn't just feel good, it attracted better doors than the ones that slammed shut behind me. Sentinel Logistics didn't waste time proving they were nothing like my former employer. From the moment I stepped into their headquarters, they treated me not as a relic of some bygone era, but as the architect of something new, something they desperately wanted to build. And for the first time in years, I felt the spark again, that old thrill of staring at a blank blueprint and imagining the system no one else could see yet. They gave me a small team, full autonomy, and one simple mandate: build the future. So I did. For 6 months, my days were quiet and purposeful. No politics, no backhanded comments, no fragile egos pretending to lead. Just engineering. Real engineering. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes you forget the clock. We tore apart old assumptions, rewrote architectures, and built a platform that didn't just compete with Atlas Core, it outran it before lunch. When Sentinel Prime finally launched, the market felt the tremor immediately. Orders processed twice as fast, downtime vanished. Clients switched over in weeks, not months. Analysts called it a once-in-a-decade disruption. Atlas Freight called it unexpected turbulence. But numbers don't lie. Their stock dropped 40% before the quarter was over, somewhere in the chaos. Evan Rhodes quietly slipped out of the company and resurfaced online teaching Web3 visionary leadership to an audience that hadn't learned to run yet. Fitting, I suppose. Some people land exactly where they belong. As for me, victory didn't come with applause or fanfare. It arrived in the form of stillness, a kind of earned dignity that settles in your chest when you finally stop fighting to be understood. One afternoon, after Sentinel Prime hit another milestone, I walked into my home office and hung the old Atlas Freight licensing contract on the wall. Below it, I added a handwritten note. Always read the fine print. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't bitterness. It was closure. And here's the truth I carried from all of this. Sometimes the ending you feared becomes the beginning you needed. Sometimes losing a place that never valued you is the first step toward finding one that finally does. If you've ever faced something similar, being overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside, share your story. I promise someone needs to hear it. And if you've stayed with me this far, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I'm grateful you're here to witness them.